visit that, especially for the opposition, to give them a little more time. Right now, we're going to open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 148. So I was actually given a list by the proponents of the people that would like to speak initially. We'll start with Assemblywoman Fiore, who will walk us through the bill, and then we have Professor John Lott and Sheriff Chuck Allen, who I'd like to have come up to the table first. Good morning, Miss Fiore. Got your name right today, huh?
You did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Michelle Fiore. My chair keeps wanting to call me Michelle Flower, which it's very similar because Fiore in Italian does mean flower. So I am presenting to you today AB 148. And I'm going to take you through the bill. Sections 1 and 5 of this bill authorizes sheriffs and campus police within the limits of available money to provide concealed firearm permit holders with information regarding instructors and organizations that offer courses focused on firearm safety in educational environments. Section 2 of this bill is a numbering change to accommodate the new paragraph added in Section 3. Section 3 and 4 amend the NRS 202.265 and 202.3673 to authorize those who possess a concealed firearm permit to carry a concealed firearm on the property of the Nevada system of higher education, a private or public school, or a child care facility. The Section 3 and 4 are extremely important. We're going to hear from Amanda Collins here in a little while to tell her story. Also, I just want to point out, because this section is quite important, that our teacher from Sparks, who also was a concealed weapons permit, 45-year-old former Marine, was shot and killed last year at his school, and it just puts our teachers at risk. So not only are our teachers defenseless at work by not allowing them to bring their concealed firearms on campus, we have also left our teachers defenseless when they go to the gym at 5 a.m. before work, or when they stop for groceries late after work, coming home. A former maintenance supervisor of the Clark County School District contacted me and supported this bill because his former employees are dispatched to maintenance calls at our schools in the middle of the night. They are often alone and have no means to provide for their own safety. There's a young woman right now that works night shift as a custodian at UNLV. She rides her bicycle to and from work at night. She has a valid concealed firearm permit and requested permission to store her firearm in her locker at work and was denied permission. She does not have the option to leave her firearm in a vehicle parked off campus. Our current law is putting this woman at risk every night as she travels to and from work on her bicycle. In addition, under Section 11, Article 1 of the Nevada Constitution, it is legal to openly carry a firearm in the non-secure areas of public airports. This section amends NRS to allow those with a valid concealed firearm permit to carry a concealed firearm in the same areas of public airports where it is already legal to openly carry. 40 states right now, I'm going to show you this, it's in your packet too. 40 states allow concealed firearm in non-secure areas. If you look at this map, Nevada is one of only 3 states where open carry is legal, but concealed carry is not. This change makes Nevada law consistent with the vast majority of airports around the country, and all firearms are still prohibited in secured areas and beyond TSA screening checkpoints. Currently, it is also legal to open carry firearms in portions of public buildings that are open to public access. Unless otherwise prohibited, Section 4 would make it legal for concealed firearm permit holders to carry a concealed firearm in those same public buildings. law-abiding citizens with concealed carry permits would no longer be considered a criminal because their shirt or jacket accidentally covered their firearm while standing in line at the DMV. Areas that are not open to access by public may still prohibit concealed firearms. In all of 2013 and 14, only 2 people with a concealed firearm permit were granted permission to carry their firearm on campus. Section 6 instructs the Board of Regents that those with concealed firearm permits must not be required to first seek permission to carry a concealed firearm. The Board may still require permission for anyone who does not possess a concealed firearm permit. Section 7 directs the Board of Regents to prescribe new rules for granting of permission to carry or possess a weapon in accordance with Section 6 of this Act. And Section 8, if passed, this Act becomes effective on July 1st, 2015. I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Lott.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate Chairman Hansen and Representative Fiora inviting me. My name is John Lott. I've been a professor most of my life, having had positions at the Wharton Business School, University of Chicago, Yale, Stanford, Rice. But right now I'm speaking to you as president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. There are 3 general issues that I'd like to briefly address. One is the general behavior of permit holders. 2 is concerns about risks that might arise from permit holders being present at mass public shootings. And 3 are the possible benefits from allowing people to go and carry in what had previously been gun-free zones.
Professor, let me interrupt you for 1 second. You are the author of this, correct?
Correct. More Guns, Less Crime from the University of Chicago Press.
Very good. So you are actually from Illinois?
Well, I lived in Illinois when I was at the University of Chicago, but right now I'm from around the Philly area.
Very good. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Thank you.
Please continue.
Anyway, with regard to the behavior of permit holders, if you look at the data for 2014, you had a revocation rate for permit holders of a little bit over 1/10 of 1 percentage point. If you look at anything that's related to either felony convictions or anything that might be related to violence, it's in about a little bit in the thousandths of 1 percentage point. But it's not even clear from the data that I was able to get from the legislative analysts whether any of those cases involve firearms. So that may be even an overestimate of the risk for people who have firearms permits. The behavior is, the experience is similar in other states. If you look at the states that we have information on firearms violations that result in revocations, it's usually in the tens of thousands of 1 percentage point, or at most thousands of 1 percentage point. And most of those are for relatively trivial cases. We have a lot of experience with regard to the gun-free zones that are being talked about in this legislation. With regard to colleges, for example, 11 states mandate that if someone has a concealed handgun permit, that public universities and colleges be mandated to allow them to carry in at least some form on college campuses. There are another 21 states that leave it up to the individual university to decide. With regard to K through 12, according to the National Council for State Legislatures, over 20 states in some form allow permit holders to carry permanent concealed handguns on school property. And prior to the early 1990s, when the Federal Safe School Zone Act was passed, basically any of the states that allowed concealed carry on school property. We can look at a variety of behavior, but if you look at crimes, for example, by permit holders on any type of school property, I've not been able to find, nor anybody's been able to point to an example of a crime that's been committed in a place where they're allowed to carry by permit holders. And I've been able to find 3 accidents that have occurred over time in either university or K through 12 property. All 3 of those accidents were non-trivial. Were trivial in terms of any harm that was done. Just to give you an idea of how law-abiding permit holders are, we recently did an analysis that looked at crime rates by police officers and comparing them to permit holders. I have a handout that's included there. And what you find is the police officers are incredibly law-abiding. The rate at which they go and are convicted of any type of felony or misdemeanor is less than 1/30th the rate of the general population. But if you compare it to permit holders are very law-abiding compared to police officers. At most, their conviction rates are about 1/6 the rate of police officers. We can also look at the behavior of college-age permit holders. There's a lot of concern about that, a lot of hypothetical things that might go wrong rather than guessing about this. There's several states that I have data for. I have a report that I presented to you for Michigan and Texas where we had data broken down by year of age. And what you find is that permit holders who are of college age, either 18 to 22 in the case of Texas or 21 to 22 in the case of Michigan, are at least or much more law-abiding than the general population, in fact. So it's not just a question of how young people behave, but the question is how do permit holders behave. Now, with regard to the second general issue, concerns about the risks in places like mass public shootings, there are a lot of hypotheticals that are raised. Primarily, examples would be what happens if a permit holder accidentally shoots a bystander when they're trying to stop one of these mass public shootings. You can go through every single one of the cases where a permit holder has stopped a mass public shooting. There's not one single case where a permit holder has accidentally shot a bystander. So is this possible that something like that might occur? Yes. But at least it seems like you should be able to point to at least one incident where something like that has actually taken place. With regard to the concerns that police, when they arrive on the scene, might accidentally shoot a permit holder, is that a possibility? Sure. But when you in fact look at the actual behavior of police officers, you find there's not one single case where a permit holder has stopped one of these mass public shootings where police officers have gotten confused and accidentally shot the permit holder by mistake. There are other issues that I could possibly go through, but those are the two main ones that usually seem to be raised in these cases. The third general area is one of the benefits from allowing permit holders. Probably the most striking piece of evidence to me is that if you look since 1950, with just two exceptions, every single one of the mass public shootings where 4 or more people have been killed have taken place where general population is not allowed to carry handguns. It's just not in the United States. In Europe, all the mass public shootings have taken place where people aren't allowed to defend themselves in that way. And these cases are just not random. You know, in Nevada, if you have a concealed handgun permit, you're allowed to carry your permit concealed handgun virtually any place in the state. If these types of attacks were random, you'd think that 98 or 99% of the attacks would be taking place where permanent concealed handguns are allowed, rather than in the tiny areas within the state, either here or in other states, where permanent concealed handguns are banned. The thing that's interesting for anybody who actually goes through and reads the documents in these mass public shootings is how these attackers consciously pick out those areas where they know victims aren't able to go and defend themselves. I'll just give you a couple cases from this past year, for example. You probably read or know about the Santa Barbara shooting last June, in which 6 people in total were killed. Well, if you actually read the 141-page manifesto from the killer in that case, after you get by him complaining about women not appreciating what a great guy he is about 50 times, what you find is that he goes through excruciating detail explaining why he picked the particular venue to go and engage in his attack. There are multiple cases like this. I'll just give you one example. He mentions in the manifesto how the ideal target he would think would be spring break in Santa Barbara, which is where he was. Apparently, spring break is, and Santa Barbara is the mecca for students from around California, indeed much of the West, to go there to celebrate spring break. And he said that there would be a target-rich, to use his term, target-rich environment for him in terms of trying to kill the college-age students that he wanted to kill. But he did extensive research, as they frequently do in these cases, and what he said was, for example, he looked at old YouTube videos or read news reports, and he said there were just too many armed police officers in the area, and that maybe he could go and kill 1 or 2 of the police officers, but since there were so many police officers there who would be armed, he was sure he would be killed before he could go and start killing the students, which were his primary target. And so he then went on to other targets that possible targets that he discussed. Just a couple weeks after that, in Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada, there was another mass public shooting. On the killer's Facebook page, he had literally a dozen comics about gun-free zones and making fun about gun-free zones. On one of the comics that he had a mass public shooter. He had a victim who was trying to stumble and run away from the mass public shooter, and the victim was turning to the killer saying, "You can't have a gun here. We banned guns in these places. You can't shoot me." And above the killer's head, he has a little bubble saying, "What a moron," as he's aiming the gun at the person who's trying to run away. All I'm trying to make clear here is that this person was obviously aware of gun-free zones and was considering them in, or would have thought about them in connection with his attack. Those are just from this last year. There are many other similar cases over time that one could go and point to. You look at something like the Batman movie theater shooting. There were 7 movie theaters within a 20-minute drive of the killer's apartment. Only one of the movie theaters actually posted signs banning permanent concealed handguns. The killer didn't go to the movie theater that was closest to his home. He didn't go to the movie theater that posted that it had the largest auditoriums in the state of Colorado, which you would think would be attractive for somebody who wanted to kill as many people as possible on a premiere of a Batman movie. Instead, he went to the only movie theater that posted signs banning permanent concealed handguns. You can go to our website. We have a long list of mall shootings, and what you find is that in every single one of the mass public shootings involving malls, they all were posted areas where people weren't allowed to go and carry permanent concealed handguns. Even though there would be many other malls in the area, often closer to the killer's home, that were not posted, they would continually pick the areas that were posted. Now, I'll just leave you with one general thought. Ron Noble, who's the head of Interpol, kind of Europe's version of the FBI, a little bit broader than that, after the Westland Mall killing in Nairobi, Kenya in 2013, came out with a statement. He basically said there were like 68 people that were killed in that mall shooting, 157 people who were wounded. The reason why I bring this up in part is just 2 weeks ago, the Somali terrorist group who was involved in that Kenya shooting made a threat against Mall of America, which actually also happens to be a gun-free zone, the largest mall in the United States, in Minnesota. But if you look at Ron Noble's statement, he basically said there's 2 ways to stop these types of attacks. You can either make an area a gun-free zone, or you can allow victims to be able to go and defend themselves. And he said his views have changed dramatically over time. When he first became head of Interpol, he thought the obvious solution was just to ban guns from certain areas. But what he had learned over time is that it's basically impossible to actually effectively ban guns from areas, that particularly when you're dealing with terrorist groups or other people who are planning these attacks. And these mass public shooters that we have in the United States, you take something like Adam Lanza. He was planning it for 2.5 years. Other criminals, a year. Short periods of time, there are 6 months that they're planning these attacks. But when they're planning these attacks for long periods of times in advance, he said it's basically impossible to prevent them from bringing weapons into the area. And so what he said was the only people you're really disarming are the victims in this case, and not the people who are perpetrating the attacks. And so he said himself and others who he's talked to have changed their opinion about what might be the best way of going and trying to stop these attacks. What might seem the most obvious way of solving it to begin with actually makes it safer for the criminals to go and do the attack and make it more likely they'll be successful. In my work with Bill Landis at the University of Chicago, when we did research on this, we basically found that the one thing that determines how many people get killed or injured in these attacks is the amount of time that elapses between the attack starts and when someone is able to arrive on the scene with a gun to stop it. And I thank you very much for your time.
Professor, thank you. Sheriff Allen?
Good morning, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheriff Allen, Sheriff of Washoe County. I'm here to show my support of Assembly Bill 148. As you know, being the 26th elected sheriff of Washoe County, fairly new to the organization, the majority of voters who voted last year voted for my platform. My platform is a very pro-Second Amendment platform. I had the opportunity to address campus carry in many public venues, and my position on that bill has not changed today. I do believe that those citizens who are, by the way, checked with a background check, who obtain a CCW, should have the right to carry a firearm. I also had the opportunity to sit down with Amanda and her father, Tom, about this time last year, where she shared her story about the atrocious act that happened to her on the university campus. I do believe that folks know the rules when they are given the opportunity and right to carry their firearm concealed, and that is the key right there, keeping the firearm concealed. Part of the training does include holstering, deploying, firing the weapon, qualifying with the weapon, etc. I won't belabor you with that, but primarily I'm here to show my support for the bill. I won't be able to stay here all day, and I wanted to point out that my representative assigned down here full-time, Lieutenant Eric Spratley, will be here as well. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Sheriff. Yeah, Lieutenant Spratley does a great job for you. Are there any questions at this time for these three? Mr. Araujo and then Mr. Anderson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Ms. Fiore, this question's for you. According to numerous surveys, there is widespread opposition to forcing colleges to allow guns on campus. Let me give you some statistics that I was able to pull up. 95% of college presidents oppose guns on campus. 94% of faculty oppose guns on campus. 79% of students said that they would not feel safe if faculty, students, or visitors were allowed to bring concealed guns onto their campuses. Recently, the student body of UNR, the student governments, in a resolution voted to oppose AB 148. Furthermore, the president of UNR in the paper yesterday made a comment, and it states the following: "They are not doing this for us. They are doing it to us." So given this broad opposition from the folks who would be directly impacted by this legislation, why are we forcing them to abide by AB 148?
She's asked that I respond to this. I mean, I've been an academic most
Professor,
of my life.
state your name again.
Oh, excuse me, John Lott. I've been an academic most of my adult life. I've been around academics and students. It's not something that I take particularly lightly. I'm not sure about the exact polls or who conducted them or what was done there. But look, this is a safety issue that's here. You can look at polls of police officers, for example, people who have expertise in safety issue, unlike the people who are being polled in the polls that you're referencing. Police One is the largest private organization of police officers in the United States with about 450,000 members. 370,000 of them are active duty. You have another 80,000 of them are retired police officers. And yet, and there are about 600 and some thousand police officers nationwide, just to give you an idea how much of the police officers they represent for full-time officers. 80% of their members believe that allowing people to carry permanent concealed handguns in previously gun-free zones would reduce the amount of carnage. When their members were asked what's the single most important thing that could be done to stop mass public shootings, the number one response that they gave was to eliminate gun-free zones. So, I mean, one can go and look at polls. Look, if you look at people's perceptions, how they change on concealed carry before and after states have adopted concealed carry, there are a number of states where concealed carry was passed where polls indicated that people opposed concealed carry. But after a year or two, I'm sure you've seen the polls on that, what's happened? People have realized that a lot of the fears that they had simply haven't come to pass. And support for concealed carry generally in those areas has increased dramatically. My guess is, look, I understand what people's reaction is. They think by simply banning guns from an area, that will make it safer. The problem is you have to ask who obeys the law. And while we'd like to believe, like Ron Noble originally thought, that if we ban guns from an area, that's going to make it safer. Unfortunately, the people that obey that are the good law-abiding people, not the people who are intent to doing the attack. If the Somali terrorists go to the mall, at the Mall of America, and they see a sign saying that guns aren't allowed in the mall, do we believe that they're going to honor the sign that's there and not take the guns into the mall?
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Ms. Fiore, Professor, Sheriff. I wanted to talk a little bit about the learning environment. That's something that's pretty important to me. I'm a UNLV law student, and so I know when I go to school that I want to be focused. Now, as it turns out, I'm a little bit more comfortable with weapons personally. I've been around them, grew up with them, Marine Corps, etc. But I know that not every student that's going to be in a class with me is as familiar as the sheriff might be, or I might be, or you might be, Ms. Fiore. So what I'm asking is that, what would be your answer to them when you say that you're bringing this element into their learning environment? They're there to focus. They're paying a lot of money for school. They're not as comfortable with it as we are. What would you say to them when we're putting it into their environment?
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for the question. I wouldn't say anything to them because
State your name.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair. This is Assemblywoman Michelle Fiore. Mr. Anderson, I wouldn't say anything to them because they will not know that I am the one standing next to them with my firearm on my person. So there's no reason to fear. When I'm walking through the building, you don't see my firearms open. You don't see where I conceal my firearm. So I think that the non-threat that you guys are trying to visually paint out there is a non-issue.
Mr. Orenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Assemblywoman. Good morning, Professor. Good morning, Sheriff. My question for whoever would like to take it. According to the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, 4 out of 5 of college students in our country consume alcohol. According to them, half of those college students who do drink also do binge drinking, and they've got data showing that last year over 600,000 of those students hurt themselves during binge drinking. University of Michigan has a study that states that in 2013, 34% of college students across the country used some kind of illicit narcotics. My concern is if we add firearms to the mix of our college campuses where we've got young people who are trying to decide what they want to do with their lives and are also experimenting with substances like this, doesn't that create a dangerous recipe? And anybody who'd like to answer it?
This is John Lott responding to the question. Look, that's the reason why I looked at the experience in other states that are there. You have 11 other states that mandate that once somebody has a concealed handgun permit, they're allowed to go and carry it in some form on university campuses. You have another 21 states that leave it up to the individual universities to decide, though most don't allow it in those 21 states. The types of concerns you're raising, sure, there's hypothetical things, but can you point to cases in any of those states? Some of those states have had it for long periods of time, a decade and a half or so, in parts of Colorado or Utah or other places. Any examples of the types of concerns that you're raising have occurred? It's not just that there's some young people who are irresponsible. There's some old people who are irresponsible. The issue is permit holders, the type of person who's willing to go through the process to go and get a concealed handgun permit, do they represent a risk? And if you look at the handout that I gave you from a report that we did last year, looking at states where we could break it down by even year of age, college-age permit holders are, at least as safe or safer than the rest of the permit holders, and permit holders as a whole are extremely law-abiding. And you can't find a single example of the types of concerns that you raise in any of those states having occurred. Not one example. If you could go and point to maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 examples, given how many states and how many schools we're talking about, then it seems like it would be an issue to go and debate. But since you can't go and point to a single example of something like that happens, it seems like it's not, while it's hypothetical, it doesn't seem particularly relevant for analyzing the particular bill that you're looking at right now.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Professor Lott. So I know you've done very extensive work in Michigan, Texas. You've given us some handouts, Chicago, and so forth. I was just wondering, since we're talking specifically about Nevada, do you have any data, statistics, done any analysis of our state, and not just on the higher education level, but because this bill, from my understanding, is also going to deal with private and public schools, and is also going to deal with child care facilities.
John Lott again. Thank you very much for your question, sir. No, I mean, all my work what I've done, my book, More Guns, Less Crime, that the chairman pointed to, looked at data for all the states, looked at revocation rates for all the states, including Nevada. Nevada is pretty typical. I've recently, over the last week, looked at revocation rates for college-age students in Nevada, and they're no different than the revocation rates for the general population in Nevada. And so, some of the things you could only look at maybe after you change the law, what would they be like on college campuses? But you can go and see those permit holders, presumably when they're across the street from the college campus and they're carrying, or other places in the state, and they seem to behave just as responsibly, just as low of a revocation rate as the rest of the population that carries concealed handgun permits. So unless you're concerned about concealed handgun permit holders generally in the state, it doesn't seem like there's any evidence that college-age ones would be of greater risk that's there.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on Mr. Orenshaw's comment about alcohol and guns mixing, isn't it true that the campuses, which would include the fraternity houses and the sorority houses, are supposed to be dry with no alcohol?
Yes. So are you saying these non-concealed weapons permit, the non-gun people are breaking the law? I mean, are they not abiding? They are supposed to be dry campuses. There's no alcohol allowed on those campuses. Thank you for the question.
Ms. Diaz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assemblywoman Fiore, I have specific concerns, especially about now them being able to carry in our airports. I think it's a little overreaching, especially when the driver of our Nevada economy is tourism, and we have a lot of international tourists that come to our city, and they are not accustomed to environments in which citizens can carry guns. So these are 41 million people coming to visit, and it is the biggest influx to our revenue. So you're telling me that it's more important that we pass your bill and allow people to carry at airports and all and everything, and not really think about what will it do to our revenue, our tourism, and then that is going to obviously strain all of the public services we have to provide for our Nevadans.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Diaz. So I think that the question that you posed, I don't think that you're aware that I can walk into our airports right now, today, with my gun on my hip openly. So I prefer to conceal my weapon. So, people, it's not visual. But right now, it is the law here in the state of Nevada. I can drive into the airport. I could walk into the airport. I can walk all around the airport. I just can't pass the TSA. And I could have my firearm on my hip openly. So today, we are allowed to have guns at the airport.
Ms. Seaman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think you've answered part of my question, because I was going to ask you, has our open carry law deterred any tourists that you know of?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Seaman, for that question. No, it hasn't. So our tourists are still coming to Nevada. And, I think it's really telling in this last election cycle with all the anti-gun nuts out there spending millions of dollars out of New York City. I think Nevada made a loud and clear statement to don't touch our guns.
Okay, seeing no further questions for these three, thank you very much for your testimony at this time.